Dr. Murray with another Journal Club, looking at an article that set a lot of important information, or put out a lot of important information about what is the optimal load for power development. This study was done in 2007, and I'm going through some of these seminal studies as I start this Journal Club because they're so important. Like, these are foundational pieces of information that we still use today in strength conditioning and other wings of the field, whatever it may be. We talked about fitness fatigue model before. And as well as my first article, which is one of my favorites, is Understanding Not to Failure Training, the value of it when you talk about power and how it can be used with concurrent training. This particular study by Cormie et al. In 2007 in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise looked at the optimal power for 3 different lower body exercises. And in so doing also accounted for with the 2 of those exercises with the contribution of you moving your own body. So the 3 exercises in this study were this jump squat, just jumping, vertical jump, so with bar of some percentage or without, a traditional back squat, and the power clean. Power clean did not take into account the body mass of the individual, just because the bar is hypothetically moving independently of the person, right? Even though you have to stand up with it to some degree and so on and so forth. But these researchers in this study, again, thought about the body from the knees up, and that when you squat, you got to squat your body too, right? There's a contribution to the body. So good study, in my opinion. Trained individuals, just males though, so this could be different in females. Male trained collegiate athletes, American football, track and field, and they did different percentages for each of these exercises and looked at power. Now, power, if you're not familiar, is force times velocity. So this is a combination of peak force on the force plate. In this case, they measured it in a linear transducer for determining velocity, barbell velocity, or the velocity of the individual. The percentages that were used for the jump squat were 0, 12, 27, 42, 56, 71, and 85. And like, what's up with the weird numbers? It's because, again, they're taking into account the contribution of the person's size from the knees up. Okay. With the jump squat, it was just the person, no load. So just from the knees up, that's the optimal load. So you can think of this as a velocity-specific exercise. This makes sense that you don't want to add a lot of load to the person. Just jump with your body weight. If you want to optimize power, no load. The squat, 0, 12, 27, 42, 56, 71, 85. So an exercise now, it's usually used for more of peak force development, right? But 56% was the optimal load for the combination of force and velocity. Okay, 56%. Again, what's up with the weird numbers? Because that includes the person's body mass as well. So the load of a 56% external load, that's what produced optimal power. And we're going to talk about how these numbers, why you should care and how they fit. And then power clean, it was 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Again, they're nice and rounded because we're not taking into account the person's size. 80% was the optimal load for the power clean. Okay, 80%. So if you look at the scale here, the jump squat was 0, squat was 56, and then the power clean was 80. Okay, the power clean is 80. So a heavier load is required to optimize power in the power clean than it is to just jump with the body weight. And then the squat is somewhere in between. So how do you use this data? Number one, obviously now there's percentages that are valuable for setting optimal load. So you could work up to, in your cycling of lifting, up to 80% of 1 RM for the power clean, assuming the athlete can do it correctly. You can make sure to do most of your jumping without any external load. You could do your squat work at 56%. And, already I'd be like, what are you talking about? Okay, that's true. But, or at least it's supported. It's supported by this article. But even, I happened to run into Dr. Cormie years ago. It's not like we're friends or anything, but I just ran into her and she said, a lot of people took this study and just said, this is the only percentage that I'm going to train at. And that's a mistake. Keep in mind, like something like the squat, if you want to build peak force, and the study found, not surprisingly, that the highest percentage, 85%, produced the highest peak force. Well, that's going to be valuable. Okay. If we're just looking for an optimal load, it's 56%, but you can scale through the percentages or have a week where you're up and down, a high low day. Think of Louis Simmons's type of training if it followed a high-low day, or in that type of dynamic maximal, or just a high-low day training. And so a day that's focused more on velocity of movement, your low day, and a day that's more focused on maximal. So the 56% could be the range to work through, like a pendulum wave, like 50, 55, 60, right? Could be the speed day. And then you're run through the scale of maximal work as well, 80, 85, 90, whatever you're going to do. That percentage of optimal load then could be used in that way. With your jumping, you could do some loaded jumping, but the further you get away from just the body weight, the less the velocity is going to be, and the more it becomes about peak force. And obviously you crush people's spines and soles. So, I'm not a big jump squat person with load. Just jumping is what I prescribe. But you could scale up a little bit and add 10%, right, of a 1RM on there to move towards peak force a little bit more, and then periodize it towards velocity later on. Power clean. You obviously wouldn't start with 80, you'd work up to 80. And in so doing, you're running through more velocity type movements. You may go up to 80 and then come back down before a season or before an important power event other than weightlifting, right? Like Phil Core Sport athlete, for an example, might come back to 60% because now you're more focused on the velocity of the movement while keeping your squat work more into the peak force side. Again, there's a lot of ways to do this. This study does not mean that you should only train at these percentages. It just means if you're looking to optimize load, it can help guide that process. Knowing the power cleans value in power development is a little bit at a higher percentage. That means don't do power cleans at 40% if you're trying to optimize power, assuming the athlete knows how to do the exercise and so on. If you're trying to optimize power in the jumping, make sure you're jumping. Now, not surprisingly, if you pair plyometric training, okay, and I know that there's different definitions for that, but typical jump training, let's call it that, with heavy like squatting, lo and behold, you have athletes that run faster and jump higher, right? And that makes sense because now you're kind of bracketing this idea of optimal power. You're having peak force type of activities, squatting heavy, and then you're doing high velocity type movements like jumping. And so, the average in there could be around 56% for the total training exposure for the week. You might find that that's true, as you run through the percentages of squat work and still jump at body weight, that's always going to go a little bit higher, but you might find that it's always in that 50, 55, 60, right? Roughly that range of average load per week. If you weight it for the amount of reps are done jumping and lifting. So there's something interesting to think about how this applies. So study does a really cool job of looking at the force velocity relationship, finding optimal power, realizing that every exercise is different, and then thinking about it in terms of a training program, how you might organize and use this information, not just sitting on that optimal load, but how you might use an average load or work up to it like in the power clean and come back down and think about velocity, what you're doing, specificity of training. Okay, so really cool study. Again, one of those that, obviously I've held on to over the years, and the information there has been valuable as I've done squat programs and done strength conditioning programs over the years. So if you find that valuable, subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more in the field of exercise, sports science, nutrition science. Like the video if you like it, of course, and leave a comment if you have any questions, etc. And I'll try to answer in a timely manner. I'll see you in the next video.